Thank you very much for three brilliant papers, because they've certainly confounded the situation by bringing up examples which actually cuts into all these three worlds we're trying to use as an analytic model. But precisely because of that complexity, it also reflects that a simplification that's used by analytical models serves some sort of purpose, because then it allows us to look into a situation which is not a clear-cut position, but mixed. But two of these positions really are about the traditional world, and how that traditional world now is being invaded by these other two worlds we're talking about. But what Thomas actually talked about the body, that is something a little bit outside of this perimeter, because the body as a dimension of art was not actually part of the Chinese art world. It was very much of the global art world, but it is something that brings this issue back to China, the national body and the classical Chinese body, and how that actually becomes an activist body. It also throws open another question when Gao Shiming and I and Johan was trying to fit up this model. Is one of the methodological trope we were trying to do at the time was to look at what we call art and oppose it against not just what this art does, but what about the difference between an art thing and what is not an art thing, such as the performance theatrical thing and that we call art, and what about things which is not art, and what does this do to the things which are not art, rather than what makes them different. And what Thomas's analysis of the body, of the theater of the body, he claims that this art body, in fact, would act upon the social body and activate it. This seems to there's a leap there, which I think will be interesting to hear the response to.
Yeah, I'm interested in art worlds, but I'm also interested in the world of who we are and who we become. And I think one of the other patterns is just to think through these dynamics not only in psychoanalytical ways, but really in physical ways. I think throughout life, and one discovers that, is it could also be a theme of adulthood, of how we change our own body from the body of a child into the body of an adolescent, into the body of an adult, into the body that is aging. And I think that partly transcends the idea of three worlds as well, because that physical presence, that physical life, we're always aware of, but we hardly talk about it. And I do feel that in China, the body is actually always been represented. There's an early story which Feda Wei already referenced in contact with contemporary art in Breda when he did the 1997 Another Long March exhibition essay. He starts with the story that is written in Zhuangzi of how the perfect artist is the artist who doesn't paint a portrait of the emperor, but it's the artist who stays behind in his studio, and then the guards come back. It's the famous story where the artist is sitting naked in front of a blank wall, and then the emperor says, "This is the true artist." This was a role model. That artist was a role model for a lot of performance artists as well, to say we're not producing artworks or art worlds, but we're producing our own body. I was actually struck in the collection and in the exhibition by this work that I've been looking for a long time as we encounter all these works, which is the image of Liu Wei, Do You Like Pork, which is upstairs. And it's actually a very interesting work, again, about a change in the perception of the body. I think it actually challenges the body of Mao Zedong, the body that is a surface body. It was painted in 1995, and it basically shows a girl with a big cunt, and it shows a lot of pork, and it shows a lot of bodies, and it shows guts and even droppings. It is also related for me to the statement that Zhou Zhijie made in around the same time, I think 1995, when Zhou made a very small installation of a public toilet, and it was published in the Grey Book or the Black Book, and it said, you have to look beyond the surface on the outside of the body, you have to look inside. I think the statement was also related that the surface beauty, underneath there is a real physical body there. So we relate that as well to works by Gu Dexin, which were these early installations of 1989, which were very physical in its kind of, there were almost guts there. There was a body there. So I find it very interesting, and also how artists themselves change their work even because of their body changing. Ma Liuming is an example. You have an image of Ma Liuming in the display, but Ma Liuming stopped performing after he heard that he was too old and too fat to perform. And he stopped performing for that reason. But as I always mention to him, I think you should actually continue performing, because it actually shows what transcends, say, different art worlds or different choices. You can step outside of those three worlds that were presented in the morning. And that's maybe through the body.
Well, Thomas, actually, when you talk about body and the performance, I know that's your obsession and preoccupation, but it also opens up to directions that you kind of nicely hinted in your paper, which is the theatricality and contrivance, which is something that interests me more. Because I once talked to artists who witnessed the East Village production of the performance. And it turns out actually that a lot of this so-called performance art involving body and so forth is so painstakingly staged. Because they say, well, you look at Sang Huan and all these others, look like, the foregrounded is the body. But in fact, and this is someone who informed me about this. They said, you don't know how this whole thing, it takes hours and hours to stage and for theatrical effect. And it's actually very, very boring and all that. So I wonder whether you have any thought about this whole horizon of the contrivance and theatricality and so forth. In fact, in thinking through about this three worlds model, and one of the things I kind of cut out from my note was that I was thinking that, okay, what was the sort of socialist legacy to our contemporary art? And then I boldly thought of this and said, well, if anything, it's really the theatricality. I mean, if you think about socialist China, what it sort of impact, now that we're in a sort of more or less in a post-socialist era. So you look back and say, well, what is it, the legacy that we kind of got from that period? And one is sort of contrivance, theatricality, grandstanding. I mean, those are sort of things that it has sort of some kind of impact on the contemporary art making. So to that extent, I think even though the performance art seems to undermine certain values of the Maoist era, but to some extent, Chinese can never quite get away with this tradition of making things in a sort of contrived way. And I was also thinking about the photography as well. It's always the sort of 摆拍 tradition, right? Like you stage it and you do it. So I was very intrigued by your mention of the body in connection with theatricality. I wonder actually that unsaid subtext you kind of hinted towards. What was it that you were thinking about the theatricality? I guess that was sort of intrigued me very much.
Well, for me, mainly, I'm not necessarily thinking about theatricality, but more as performance as art. Or performance art is the art of performance. And it's very clear that artists in China, from sort of the real reference making of what is performance art, 行为艺术, that they say it's not 表演, it's not performing. So it's not that I suddenly get up and I undress myself. It is actually a preparation of material. And it's, in the case of the East Village, it's a preparation of documentation. They were very much focused on registering the performance in both photography as well as video. And staging the performance was part of staging it for a local but also an international audience. It was actually quite interesting that in the case of Zhang Huan sitting on the public toilet, that the village chief came out and he asked, why is this man sitting on the toilet? And they had already prepared, because of all the cameras, oh, he's doing 广告, he's doing advertisement. What kind of advertisement is he doing? Oh, he's doing an advertisement for fish oil and honey. Look, he's covered in it. Oh, so you're making an advertisement. You're recording this for TV. Yeah, we're making a commercial. Oh, then it's fine. And the performance was... So they cleverly prepared everything. By this time, of course, we have to realize that Chinese artists were introduced to Carolee Schneemann and other performances. So they knew the representation of performance. But I guess in this current paper, I'm not really actually preoccupied with performance or with performance art. But I find it very interesting that if we, instead of thinking about the nation as something that is either represented by the party, or in the case of the socialist tier, or the nation is represented by history or tradition, that is the second tier, which is the traditional tier, the Wenren tier, or the nation is represented by capital, that in conversations with artists and with people in China, the nation is actually a body. It is the body of the nation. And that was the representation of the sick body of the atom bomb. That representation sort of falls outside of categorizing whether it's socialist art or traditional art, or it's also not global capital art. It is actually a representation of a sick body of the atom bomb, which is then a reference of the sick body of the nation that was created in a socialist time when China also split up with the Soviet Union. So it's actually a very complex, layered work, represented through an ailing body, an ailing nation.
Perhaps to just reverse this whole structure, in a way, I see the three papers looking at three issues through the three worlds. What does the intellectual do in the traditional world, the socialist world, and the capitalist world, like the body, and also the use of iconography? And for the intellectual, this is really a very radical change, because the intellectual is artist and activist, and then as the public intellectual, one who does not echo real power. Whereas the body, the transformation, one thing that Berghuis has just mentioned, going over the exhibitions, is how the body is, the way is eroticized for the socialist era. And for me, of course, the interest in the traditional body is how the body was formed by the Confucian rites and ritual. And as in all ideologies, there's a certain discipline. Likewise. Anyway, I think we really ought to, unless there's more comments, we ought to open to the audience. Uh, 在座有什么意见，有什么想法，请大家发言。
Just give one kind of a comment or impression to Thomas' presentation of the body, because the materials you present so rich. It's hard for me to really grasp the central clue. The body as a flesh, physical presence. Obviously more and more so in the contemporary performance art. But back to the first two images, I don't think a body really means the physical beings at all. It's really about the continuous flow of energy that actually runs from the natural environment to inner body. But so the real substance is the formless, is the flow of qi, rather than physical presence. And I even flip this image when you talk about Zhang Yimou's ceremony. I think that's geometric configuration of movement rather than body, or mass ornament. So I'm confused by this kind of a definition of body.
Should we take a few more questions and
Yeah.
we'll do all together? Then maybe.
Yeah.
还有什么其他问题？我们还是把几个问题集中起来，让几位讲者回答，好不好？
Thank you very much. This is also a bit of an extension of the question just now, also going on the notion of the body. And I would love to find out what your thoughts are, Thomas, regarding, you were mentioning these body in mass and this huge amount of people like moving around. And I'm just interested to find out what you think of that image of the 2008 Olympics, when one juxtaposed that with what we see in Hong Kong kind of on a weekly basis, and especially on an annual basis on the July 1st. And as well as on the 4th of June, where people publicly come out to commemorate the Tiananmen incident, as well as this March for Democracy, and just these kind of two very different images of mass commemoration. And just want to find out what you think about that.
我回应一下那个汤伟峰刚才在讲这个身体问题。实际上他举的例子里面，我最感兴趣的是3个。他说了一句话，我觉得很重要，他说汪建伟是在为中国当代中国人的这个社会身体在编舞，这是一个非常有意思的说法。当然，我们知道那个汪建伟的他举的这个08到10年这个时期的创作，他其实是在用群众演员来演群众，然后用那个难以定义的群和众来演出那个当年那个10块钱的大团结上面的那个人民。我们都知道，人民其实是一个政治话语，是一个社会神话。它实际上在这里有一种抽象化的倾向，他用那些真实的身体，来呈现这个抽象了的社会身体。我觉得这是我从那个汤伟峰的这个我感到的一个很重要的一个信息。然后同样呢，他举的另外一个例子，张艺谋呢，在那个08年的这个奥运会的开幕式上，是在用无名的身体去呈现一个抽象的国家机器，他去呈现国家的身体。然后第3个例子是吴文光那个与民工共舞。我认为表面看起来他好像特别的激进，特别的接地气，但其实他只是非常粗暴的让一个具体的社会身体进场，只是把那个具体的民工的身体当成了现成品，而不管民工其实已经是今天这个当代中国社会的一个产品，一个商品。所以说在这里呢，我倒想到了 今天他在讲这个的时候，我一直在想，加克汉谢的一本就这几年被译成英文的一本书，叫《Stage and the People》，就是其实人民这个东西，人和民，或者说我们楼上的展览里面说的这个群和众，它非常非常复杂，它难以界定，难以定义。但是这些艺术家其实都在这个非常难以定义的这群人之中。那么我们如何去呈现这个人民的身体，这个社会身体？实际上我觉得这些汤卫峰讲的这些艺术家呢，各自也包括张艺谋，各自在透视出一种信息，找到一种道路。但是具体怎么样我不知道，我只是从他的这个讲演中，我想到了一些感受。
那个，因为这个，我特别想问一下是，最原创的这个三个世界的这个理论是来自Johan的脑子，还是 Johnson 的脑子，还是高世平的脑子？是 Johnson 的脑子为主，然后你们论色加工是吧？发展。好，那因为有了这个三个 words， 好像大家就把这个就都在这个框架里边讨论了。那其实那个，当然这个三个世界是一个听起来更有快感的一个文学修辞，其实是一个世界中的三个重大影响源，是吧？是重大影响源头。然后呢，托马斯所讲的身体，它不是另外一个第四个世界。托马斯所讲的身体是那个被影响的东西，所以呢，就一定会有文人世界的身体，一定会有社会主义革命的身体，铁姑娘，那个汪精卫的那个大团结里边的身体，然后一定会有全球化的身体，跨国婚姻的身体，打网炮的身体，就是他那个身体是一个就是受影响的素材，然后不是那套意识形态。这三个世界是三个意识形态，我觉得这样子，那个我们应该是这样子来看托马斯的这个 contribution。然后呢，我想拉回来的是早上的这个题目，因为只有我跟 Johnson 和高世平直接交流过，我是不满这个三个世界的提法的，然后这个不满就被刘田已经稍微提到了。我当时坚持认为应该做四个世界的展览。之所以这么坚持呢，是这样的，我觉得，我其实认为这些理论都不是关于事实的，都不仅是关于事实的描述，它还是，我关心的是它对实践会产生什么样的结果。也就是说，这些三个世界也好，四个世界也好，是我们要把世界说成啥样，以及我们决定把自己塑造成什么样。那么，我担心的是三个世界的说法呢，进一步强化了对中国的既有的刻板印象。因为呢，我在2001年，其实就是那一天看了张艺谋拍的《英雄》那个电影，然后那里面那个秦王说建制怎么可以有19种学法给我统一的，然后我回家就做了一个噩梦，梦见那个美国统一世界了。然后我就写了一篇文章，叫做那个中国牌之我见。那里面我提出3种对中国的刻板印象，刚好就是这3个世界，就是一种是唐人街的中国，太极功夫、周易、八卦、少林，那舞狮舞龙。然后一个是红色的中国，毛主席、天安门、绿军装、熊猫奖状。还有一个是改革开放的中国，伴随着这个妖魔化中国，伴随着中国威胁论的这个烂尾楼、钉子户、拆迁、民工的脸。这3个中国基本上就是我们从98年的英塞奥那个展览，一直到现在大都会的这个展览，都可以看到这3个中国的刻板印象的投影。那这个是一个外部加给我们的。那当我们内部拿出一个我们的阐释的时候，我认为，即使我们说它是复调的，它是互相串联的，它不是分期的，它是同时的，它依然有可能强化这种 强化这种刻板印象。那实际上呢，我们刘田早上讲到的这条民间的这个力量是非常传统、非常强大的。这个洪老师说到了这个康有为的碑学，那么我们的传统世界从来就不是文人世界，现在在这个模型里面被表述成了传统世界，好像是一个世界。其实在康有为他们跳出来之前，以前的文人，北方的墓志铭到处都是不要看的，就算更早挖出汉简，他们也不会看的，是先理论上认定了民间的价值。所以某种程度上，这个民学的兴起，民间的这个兴起，民的兴起啊，其实是现代性的产物，是现代过程的一个产物。那么，但是呢，那其实即使是唐人街的那个中国，也是两个中国，一个是周易跟书法水墨，一个是五狮子舞龙。那样两个中国。那么，由于这条民的线索的存在呢，它其实使我们的中国的左翼文艺也跟墨西哥的也好、苏联的也好截然不同。就是说，毛泽东会号召老百姓、号召木刻家们向民间剪纸学习。我们的中央美术学院甚至曾经有一个系，就民间美术系，设在顶级美术学院里面。那么，这个都那在我们浙江美院的新泽派人物画，我们那次谈到了这个例子。我在中国牌那篇文章里边也讲到，当年为了创造出新泽派人物画，潘天寿他们都去民族文艺教研室去做研究，不准教书了，然后让绘画系的刘文熙、李正坚这些学过素描的学生，他们来画工农兵题材，但是呢，请了福建先油画派的老教授黄根。李根、李霞、黄熙这些人来当教授，创造出泽派人物画。我觉得这个事情现在谈论得不够，但这个事情其实非常重要，因为李根、李霞那个风格呢，其实它辐射到台湾的这个在寺庙的门上画神像的这种风格。因为民间画师他没有负担，他们很早就把画炭像、画立体感的办法吸收进来，然后再跟传统笔墨结合，再跟解剖结合，实线画骨头，虚线画圆转的肉，这么来创出一套既能兼容写生、写实和革命现实题材，又能够那个兼容传统笔墨趣味的一个产品。所以泽派人物画应该是这个我们说几个世界的时候非常重要的一个个案。但是总的来说，我是个人觉得很遗憾的。其实我们那时候讨论的时候，是28天前，我觉得其实来得及加进来，就是因为如果做成4个世界，因为显然更有攻击力，是对那个刻板印象的一个有力的矫正了。所以我觉得我们不应该就3个世界一说出来就成定论，是应该反思这个模型的建构的这个能量的。刚才说得很清楚，这不是结论，不是理论，这个其实是一个工作对象。还有对我还想说，刘田把民间放的那个位置，刘田又狡猾的进行了修辞，他说那个民间是那个大地，是吧？是一个世界，是大地，你这样就把它等同于民间是原世界。他就丧失了，他就等于可以不说同样，你也就可以说，左翼运动的历史是大地，是前提。你也可以说那个身体是不能说你也可以说那个全球化是前提。就这样子把这个要素定义为一个原世界，使它变为一个前提，实际上是使它蒸发掉。你把它引回来的话，恰恰可以用来攻击和修正现有的刻板印象。好，我说完了。
我简单的讲一句回这个问题。你刚才说的那个第4个世界，其实是一个自由空间，是一个所有无法给包容的，露在外面的空间。我恰恰就是因为相信有这样的一个江湖，有这样的一个自由空间，所以我才不愿意把它放成一个世界。一个世界就是一个意识形态，所以一个世界才可能有一个 institutional critique， 因为它才可以懂一个体系来谈。 I think 可能大部分问题是针对 Thomas， 不是针对我的。我靶子是你，交给你。
I think the first question that was asked on the configuration of energy. The configuration of energy needs a body. It's done through the body. So that was actually answered already by Gao Shiming when he gave a wonderful, I mean, it was almost like a dream abstract synopsis of my paper. And I'm very happy with that reflection, because then it means that it was actually well translated. And Chojie actually followed that up. And the other point, I think it is really about the real, combining the real body and this metaphorical body and metaphysical body as well. It is that understanding that we are connected through a real body. So what I'm talking about in comparison to this morning as well, there was a lot of conversation about medium. But as I understand, in China, medium is very simple. Medium is not like in the United States. It's not a Kraussian or a Fried or Greenberg type of medium. In China, medium is not painting. Medium is not sculpture. Medium is paint, or a medium is a piece of wood. So when you create that into form, you have to do that through the body. And what you do is you create praxis, and you create action. And the praxis is actually the crux of this whole idea, is that's the energy, is that through activating your body in building something, or in putting the paint on your own body and doing that in relationship to your environment, because the body is a process, it's not a container that holds the soul. You're conducting praxis, and you're actually making change. You're making change to society, or you're making change to the nation. And I think the reflection, therefore, of Chojie as well, on how interesting that perspective could be leading into other perspectives as well, transcending this kind of idea of three worlds or three stages, because there are continuous processes. And that praxis, I think, is also linked to the role of the intellectual. I thought that was very strongly put there as well.
I think if you think about the practice of calligraphy and its use in Chinese tradition, it was used as a way to sublimate your personality, or as a way of education. And I think you could say here the arm is part of the body, and the body is part, as he said, of the nation. I mean, if you transform the body or the part, you transform the whole. I mean, and it's all also about taking risks. I mean, you showed very much also how much these artists who involved their body are taking risks. And I think that's a very important aspect too. And a constant. I think if we talk about division, we also have to talk about constants. Otherwise, we will lose. I mean, no?
Just one response to that is, I agree with what you were saying. And perhaps to put it into this framework we're thinking about is, since we're talking really about three frameworks, and there are three ideologies, and ideologies always involve the regime of the body. So we can also talk about how the regime of the body operates in these three different worlds.
「我有3个问题。第一个问题是想问 Thomas 的，就是说，我一直觉得我们面对这100件艺术物的时候，可能还是要回到，尤其是在中文中思考。那么我不知道您是一直在提这个体，那么您是如何区分身和体？因为我们知道我们会说身体发肤受之父母，也会说5日3省吾身，然后也会说那个四体不勤五苦不分，包括刚才您注意到的这个大刘伟的那个油画的房间里面，其实也有黄继光的身体，甚至还有白求恩，甚至还有一颗舍利子。 其实这个是我们构造的一个关于身的一个集合。这个是第一个问题。第二个问题其实是，想问3位，就是刚才做讲演和回应的这3位老师，就是说，我有一个感觉，就是说，我们拿着一个当代的艺术作品，然后去谈当代的社会的时候，这个处理过程和我们将比如说我们一个长时段的一个作品排列下来，然后试图从这个作品中去得出结论是有所差异的。但是这只是一个问题，我不知道就是这个其中的微妙的差异何在。但是我感觉到刚才你们做 presentation 里面所用的这种方式，和比如说我们在处理这跨越1个世纪的100件物的时候所进行的这种推导的方式是有点不同的。然后第3个问题其实跟邱老师刚才说到的这个3个世界和4个世界这个东西很有关系，因为这个我觉得始终是一个最困难的一个问题。就其实是受到 Thomas 的一个 PPT 的启发，就是说奥运会的那个广告词“同一个世界，同一个梦想”，就是这句在当时很盛行的东西，今天可能已经被我们忘记了。但是实际上仔细去考虑的话，同一个世界其实是极其困难的一个事情。那么我们可以发现，首先可以发现的是，他在这里他用同一个梦想其实置换了同一个世界，就是因为同一个世界是不太可能的，那么我们可以用同一个梦想来置换掉它，因为有了同一个梦想，我们达到了某一种统一。另一个呢是我们在做这个策展的过程中，也曾经试图说 ，OK， 如果假设我们有3个世界的框架，那么我们可以在一个东西上拆分出来吗？就比如说这个东西属于某个世界吗？实际上我们后来得出的结论，我们试了一遍，得出的结论是，基本上每一件东西上都是重叠的，就是它是无法被直接拆分出来的。你很难说这件东西上只拥有某一个世界的基因。也就是说，这个我也只是提供目前为止所想到的东西，就是说这里面的这个困难性，也希望诸位能有更好的想法。
I'll briefly answer the Shunti. It's very interesting actually, because it's a lived body in English. So the body is a process, and that is important. Shunti, they have to be together. It's not a Cartesian dualism, therefore, of the body is a bota, a container that holds the soul. There is no Cartesian dualism, therefore, in Chinese thinking. And that, from Marx to Hegel to any Western theory that we would try to impose on China, which has a Cartesian but also a metaphysical dualism in there, a duality, in China it is received in a different way. So the Shunti is actually a metaphor for this body as process. But this is also with 同一个梦，同一个世界，同一个梦，这个到底是同一个中国，同一个人民，他们也是这样的说，因为那个时候奥运会也是关于中国、台湾、香港、澳门变成同一个中国、同一个人民，但是他们说的就是同一个世界、同一个梦，